Hello, my name is Scott McFarland, and for the past 35 years, I've been a volunteer. For over a decade, I served as a director of community service and volunteerism for the states of Illinois and then Missouri. And now I work for a national nonprofit that places volunteers all over the country. I've had the wonderful chance to meet some amazing people who are working day in and day out to make this world a little better for all of us. Now I want to introduce some of them to you. Please join me as we explore this volunteer life. Hello everybody, this is Scott. Welcome to another episode of This Volunteer Life. I'm so excited to introduce you today to a good friend of mine, Karen Mauldin-Curtis, or as she prefers to be called, KMC. She served in the Peace Corps, and after that service, she found her way to Macomb, Illinois, and Western Illinois University, where she now oversees their AmeriCorps Peace Corps Fellows program, where she takes other volunteers who served in the Peace Corps, places them in rural communities all over the state of Illinois as AmeriCorps members, and they work to build economic impact in those communities while also working on a master's degree from WIU. Karen has impacted lives all over the country and all over the world. She's an amazing individual, and I'm looking forward to hearing from her today. Enjoy.
Hey, I'm in. Go ahead.
Cool. So one thing we do to start out this is to ask everybody a little bit about yourself, and then also what's your first volunteer experience that you remember?
Okay, so a little bit about myself. I was born in South America. I was born in Venezuela, raised in Bogota, Colombia. So my first, those formative years were in Latin America and Bogota. My father was North American, my mother Colombian. We were just raised in a bilingual, bicultural family. So that was, influential to who I am and who I'm becoming, I think, still. Just that appreciation for lots of ways of thinking and being and communicating in the world. I know that I was actually in the Scouts as well. I was a Brownie still in a Brownie troop in Colombia, in Bogota. And we did have service projects there. And if I remember correctly, they would have been primarily based in our school. So that was, if I think back, probably the first time I volunteered it was a school cleanup, beautification kind of event. But in terms of maybe where I had more of the choice or the direct service, really started, I'm embarrassed to say it was in college and not in high school. I know I did service in high school, probably as part of groups or clubs I was with, but really meaningful service that I actively sought took place in college. I went to school at University of California, San Diego, and I'll say that at about 10, I transitioned to the States. My parents split up, long stories. I ended up in Southern California with living with my father and three sisters. And so I went to school in Southern California through high school, college. There was a service project, a service opportunity to, because we were so close to the US-Mexican border in Tijuana in Mexico. And so there was a group that was working with an orphanage. And so we would go down on weekends and help to clean up space and set up activities for children in an orphanage. And it was just very impactful. And I had seen extreme poverty in Colombia. I did not grow up in poverty. I grew up in wealth and privilege. My father worked for an American petroleum company, and we were in private schools, and I lived in lots of comfort. And I was aware of the disparity because in Colombia there was a lot of poverty. And so I had seen that as a young child, and that made an impression on me. And so in college, when we were in Mexico, serving with that orphanage, again, just made an impression. I remember going to the landfill, the trash dump in Tijuana, and families, children live there cleaning. I mean, working through the trash to pick up bits that they might sell or use. And that was just a reminder of just the disparity and the gap in health and security and access to all the things, right? And so that was really an impactful service experience, and that was early in my college years, and so I continued to do that during service. We also worked with literacy campaigns with schools, young children, after school programs. So did that. And then I applied to Peace Corps my senior year in college. And what I'll say about my earlier years in Colombia, and again, being aware of that disparity, is that it didn't go away for me. And I remember moving to the States, and it was about 1980, so I'm dating myself, I was about 10, and seeing a television commercial that the Peace Corps had. They don't have these on, well, I don't know, I don't have a TV, but I don't know if they have these commercials any longer, but at the time they would run commercials. And I saw a commercial from the Peace Corps, and it was, a slow moving river in an African village somewhere. And the 800 number came across the bottom of the screen, and it said, the toughest job you'll ever love. And I looked up and I announced to nobody in particular and everybody in the room in my house at the time, saying, I'm going to do that. I was 10. I saw that commercial, and I wanted to be part of what I, at the time, perceived to be a solution. So that was tucked away in there somewhere. And then senior year of college, I'm at a graduate school fair on campus, and I'm picking up applications for all the PhD programs I knew I was going to go and apply to. And I stopped by the Peace Corps booth, and I picked up that application. At the time, again, mind you, this is 1991. So things were still in paper, and we still typed things on electric typewriters.
Back in the day, not quite a stick with dirt, but let's just say, right, just some perspective. But I picked up that application, and there was just calm over me. I was anxious about the graduate school application process, and I was anxious about, like everybody, what am I going to do next year? Where am I going to take this? My goals, my dreams, my education, all of that. And I picked up that application, and I knew I was applying, I was going to get accepted, and I was going to serve in Peace Corps. And I literally called my father that evening and said, hey, I'm working on my application, and I'm going to serve in the Peace Corps. My father was not a fan. Was not a fan when I first announced it at age 10, was not a fan when I was announcing it at the age of 21. And he told me he didn't think it was a good use of taxpayer money, and not a fan. And I said, okay, I wasn't asking for permission. I was just informing you. And I, sure enough, I was accepted. And I know that for me, when something is meant to be, I feel calm. So I'm not necessarily a decisive person. I can't figure out what to have for lunch, but the big things in my life, like what to do next, who to marry, whether I'm having children or not, these big things in my life, I just know, and then I feel calm. And so I have been so fortunate that big things in my life, like the things I just mentioned, have sort of announced themselves, and I have been calm, and I have been receptive and embracive. And so that's how it was with my Peace Corps application. I applied that October of 1991, and by spring I had been sent an invitation. I believe I still have that invitation and my welcome packet in my attic in a box with other important documents. And so I graduated with my undergraduate degree in sociology from UCSD in June of 1992, and then I reported for service in August of 1992. So it's just been 30 years since I did that, and that's been the most meaningful service experience. I've done other service, and I continue to do service as an adult. That's the thing, and I know that that's really important to make that point, because I think the sooner we introduce children to service, and then create those opportunities and ask folks to volunteer, share those opportunities,
the sooner you do it, the more likely you are to do it for longer, because once you do it, I think we become hooked, whether it's small local projects or whether it's big international stuff. I've had the benefit of doing a variety of things, and I still derive pleasure and meaning from doing it, and it shapes who I am, and it has informed how I want to be in the world.
Yeah, and you're completely right on that. I mean, I talk about this a lot in terms of the research, and the research is very clear. No matter what the service is, if a young person gets involved in service right away, they're almost guaranteed to continue to be volunteering into their adult life, be more civically engaged, and so forth and so on. And to your point about not asking for permission, when a youth volunteer, be it, elementary, K through 12, or college or whatever, if it's a decision that they made and a service project that they decided, this is what I want to do, they're even more likely to continue to do it because they have that agency.
Yes.
So let's talk more about the Peace Corps experience.
Okay.
Where did you serve? And tell me about some of the experiences you had there.
Sure. So I served in the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, and I was in the education sector. So I think at the time the position was called a community education promoter. So I was not teaching. I was not in a classroom. I was there to promote and support an educational system on the ground. And so I was in a small village in the central part of the country. We had about 400 people, maybe about 100 houses, a slow moving river, a dusty road. That was it, and some houses along the roads. And it was like nothing I had experienced. And it was, and still is, really, I think, the most transformational. Well, okay, parenting is the most transformational. I will say that fast forward that whole slogan about the toughest job you'll ever love, like parenting, hands down, although it's not a job, it's just an everyday thing. But
I don't know. I've got 3 kids. Some days it's a job.
Yes. Oh no, I have 3 children as well, which is why I say it totally beats the Peace Corps slogan about the toughest job you'll ever love, because parenting. So in terms of transformational, it's right up there with parenting. Transformational. So Dominican Republic, I report there in August of 1992. And I have to say this about, well, Peace Corps and where it was then and where it is now as an agency, but I think that they have continued to evolve and improve their, and as you would hope, their recruitment, but they're very intentional and careful now. People actually can select where you can serve now. At the time, you put your name in the sorting hat. And you just said, "Hey, I'm willing to go. Put me where you think I'd be best," right? And I had a bachelor's degree in sociology and a double minor in Latin American studies and history. A whole lot of passion and not a lot of skills. So what are you going to do with that, right? So anyway, I'm in this village, and there is orientation. There are 3 months of in-service training in Peace Corps, pre-service training, actually. It's called PST. And so we learn about culture. We learn about living in the country. We learn about, techniques to facilitate groups and work with educators. We literally were using anything and everything to develop didactic materials. I mean, everything from saving beer bottle caps to make makeshift math games to little Maggie bouillon cubes that used to come in these little tiny boxes, almost like the size of matchbooks. I used to collect those and glue a newspaper article or a map or a picture, and then with a knife, cut it apart. So that was a jigsaw puzzle. I mean, we had to make our own materials, right, to teach teachers to then use for kids. So I moved to this community after 3 months of pre-service in country, and gosh, you just don't know how little you know in life. And you just like, what am I supposed to do there? But Peace Corps selects a counterpart for you, and so I had a counterpart, and really I worked primarily with forming a PTA group or a PTO group, depending on what part of the country, a parent-teacher association or organization. I worked with youth and with women's group as well. The idea was to set up the systems that might support the education in the village. My village, again, population about 400. They had a 2-room schoolhouse, and kids went to school through 4th grade. After that, most worked, and the boys in the field or the girls would either be married or work for their parents. And a few would go to a high school that would have to leave. And so if there was any financial wealth in the community, those kids left and then went on, but very, very few at that. So worked with teachers to develop educational games and to address environmental challenges that were coming and are still here, are here now, I should say. Worked with women's group. I think that for me, probably the place that felt the safest was working with women's groups. I mean, I wasn't going to go and talk to farmers. I wasn't in ag as a sector, but I also had, nothing there for them. I do believe and have continued to do the kind of work that educates and empowers women, young women, and women of all ages across the spectrum. So that to me was a natural fit, and everything from income generating projects, raising baby goats that would make more baby goats that could be sold, and then more baby goats, right? But that was an income generating project, and the women were very savvy and very well organized. And as we know, and this is, I don't have the figure, but in international development, and I think maybe we can see that even in the States, when you invest in women, women invest in their communities. And so it's not always the case that when men earn money, they invested in the community. I mean, they do, and it's not a blanket diss on men, but what I saw and what I know the research bears out is that women continue to invest in their community, sure, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, and whether it's in each other and their familial ties. And so for me, that's a place of interest, and it's also a place of motivation. I want to be part of that kind of investment. So working with youth group and young women, to this day, I'm in contact with a woman who at the time was my best friend, and seeing what's possible for women is both challenging and still a motivator. So in terms of how long you were in the DR, how long was your service after the orientation and the training beforehand? Right. So Peace Corps is a 27-month commitment. It's 3 months of pre-service training, then it's 2 years once you take your oath. And I'll say I was shy of that. I had a medical evacuation, so I didn't see that full 2-year term. Some folks extend. But for folks who are curious about Peace Corps, it's a 27-month commitment. And Peace Corps and this is another way in which Peace Corps has evolved that I think is healthy. It has moved toward really thinking about that first year as the cultural adjustment period. They're not so caught up in what you're accomplishing as much as, are you integrating, right? Are you? So that matters. And that was really important, so that we're not worried about outcomes in that first year, or even projects. It's really, have you made connections? Do you understand the language, the culture? Can you communicate? Have you built trust, right, with people in your community? And some folks live with host families, other people live individually, depends on their country and their specific site. I started out by living with a family, and then I did live independently, which was hard to come by in a community that doesn't have a lot of, as we would say, housing stock. Let's just say there just weren't a lot of shacks available at the time, but I did eventually get one. And I understood that was bucking the norm, because I was a 22-year-old woman living alone, and that culturally that was not appropriate. And yet I made certain things clear. And I will say, because I had native language proficiency, I had the benefit of being able to communicate clearly and express myself. And so, I was all in, and I was so interested in the service and having them drive what they wanted and what was possible. So it wasn't me having ideas for them, but me wanting to help them advance their goals. That I was set on. I did have 3 little things that I threw out when I very first went to meet my community. I said, I'd like to live alone. I don't eat meat, and I'm not likely to go to church with you. And I was like, those were the 3 things. Like, otherwise I'm on board. But I needed to claim something that was mine that I could protect. And so the living alone was both challenging for security reasons, actually, and just for lack of housing, but I knew I would need some space that was just mine. And so I was fortunate that eventually I was able to do that and had a lovely little shack. And I'm not a meat eater. I never was. So I wanted to put that out there right away, because I didn't want them to try to go out of their way to impress me by providing meat. Meat was not readily available.
Having to offend them by
denying it.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, these are just 3 things, right? And then I knew that if I went to church once, I would be expected to go to church every Sunday. And while I'm not opposed to church, and I was happy to attend special events and festivals, I didn't want to set myself up for an expectation. And those were just 3 little ways in which I wanted to assert myself. But other than that, I was all in, wanted to learn their culture, wanted to be immersed, and wanted to be active within. So Peace Corps is very good about giving you that time, that space, and encouraging you to make those connections. Because at the end of the day, Peace Corps' mission is really about promoting goodwill and friendship, right? It's actually not the development agency for the US government. That would be USAID, right? So Peace Corps is really about promoting goodwill and friendship, and it's about relationships. And it's meant to be a cross-cultural experience, right? And so the idea that I would be learning and gaining from my time and experience and connection to them is as important as the fact that they may learn and benefit and gain something from being exposed to and welcoming me in their community. And part of this podcast, so thank you for the opportunity, is to bring back that message, to share with others what it's like to live and serve alongside folks from other countries and other perspectives. And I still feel indebted to my village in the Dominican Republic for all the ways in which they've made my life better, and the ways I think that I'm trying to make all of that worthwhile in the world is to continue to invest in service, right? Which is why I do the work I do now, right? Preparing, engaging future volunteers through our Peace Corps Prep program at Western Illinois University and through conversations with lots of folks, but then also providing opportunities for folks who come back from Peace Corps, like the Peace Corps Fellows Program and AmeriCorps service, so that service will continue to happen. Because at the end of the day, I may not have had the impact I wanted on that particular village, but I hope to engage others to continue to do service so that many more villages can be touched.
So I'm going to have you connect the dots here in a minute between your Peace Corps service and what you do now. But before we do that, is there any other experiences or thoughts or just things that continue to kind of pop up in your head about that time you spent in Peace Corps that you want to share?
I will say that for me, it was such an important time. It may have had to do with where I was. I mean, again, I was recently graduated from college, so I'm 22. I'm super still open to the world. Because I was open to the world and because I was still so curious. I mean, I think now about how bright and shiny and young I was at the time. And I think that that's actually a great time to do this work. And it's never too late to apply to Peace Corps. So I served with people who were in their 80s at the time. But for me, that time was really important because I was still so receptive, and it allowed me to really put myself outside my comfort zone. And I had, again, in many ways, just been raised in comfort. had plenty of challenges in my life, but so it was also a good time to get away from some of that and give myself time to sort of grow and evolve. But it just informed me in such a way that it is still, I'm still trying to fully realize what's possible because of that opportunity. Dominicans were fabulous. The culture is warm and welcoming and loud and funny and tragic and all of that, right? It just all of it is there. It's so real. That experience is so real if you allow yourself to be in it. I met my husband there. That was awesome. We've been together the 30 years. That was transformative. Met him the first week of my service. He was giving a gardening workshop to trainees. It was on composting. So that's sexy stuff. And we have 3 kids and all of that's Peace Corps. So
I'll do the goats and composting, and here we are.
Yeah, and here we are in the Midwest.
Well, so was he in Peace Corps as well too, or there for a different reason?
Yeah, he was a year ahead of me in his service. So he was a 91, 93. I was 92, 94 cohort, and we overlapped. And he was providing peer leadership to my cohort that had just arrived. So yeah.
I have a feeling, and we see this in AmeriCorps as well too. I have a feeling that happens a lot. That the folks who serve together tend to stick together more, not only just relationship wise, significant other relationship wise, but just friendships in general. We see that connection being made.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm fortunate here at in Macomb at Western, where I work at Western University, and we had a really tight community of returned Peace Corps volunteers, RPCVs, and we actually had John, my husband John and I had 2 friends that we served with in Peace Corps, or who have moved to Macomb and lived here. And so one of them is a faculty member at Western, another was here at school. John's best friend. I mean, our lived with our family. Just the connections are lifelong. We lost Sean to suicide, so that is a tragic loss, and our life was better for having known him, and we met him through Peace Corps. The first person John met in Peace Corps, in training, like in the elevator, right? And so those are lifelong relationships. I'm dear friends with another couple that served in Peace Corps. They didn't serve in the Dominican Republic, but they served in Guatemala as a married couple, and also in the early 90s. And because the connection, we don't have to have served in the same country, but because the service is so deep and challenging and meaningful and rewarding, there is a shared experience regardless of where you served and when you served. Part of the reasons I think I can bond so easily and care so much about the fellows in my program, the graduate students in my program, is because there's a shared experience, and there's a shared experience with anybody who has served. If you're engaged in meaningful service, whether it is in your community or in a country or somewhere else around the world, if you're truly committed, there's a shared language there. There's something that we understand about each other that I still see today.
Well, and Peace Corps is such a small group, even though it's been around for over 50 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's only been about 250,000 people who have served. Since the beginning.
Yes, and that wasn't the plan. In fact, I remember, just in terms of like Peace Corps history, and Peace Corps just celebrated its 60th anniversary in 2021. In fact, just last week or so, Peace Corps just celebrated what would be its 61st, sort of the launching of Peace Corps, the JFK comments that he made in Michigan to college students about forming the Peace Corps. That all happened in October of 60, and then Peace Corps was formed in 61 in March. So I already forgot the question about Peace Corps and its service. So I'm so sorry.
Well, it wasn't really a question. It was just, the idea that service brings people together. I think that
Yes.
absolutely is universal. But you all, as Peace Corps, return Peace Corps members, share a certain experience that not many people have shared. And
Yes, in terms of not many, the original experience, and that's what I was going to say in terms of its history. Thank you. The original experience was that there would be more funding available. That comes down to funding, right? More funding
in
and
a federal
available.
program.
Yes, exactly right. The original intent was, at least from Sergeant Shriver and his group that was really helping operationalize, take this idea on the ground, was that it would be an exchange, and that there would be folks from other countries also coming to the States to help serve, to share, to bring their expertise, technical assistant experience, and that we would send more people over time for any number of reasons, none of which I am, can actually speak to. That didn't happen. The government didn't fund it at that level, and the government did not make it a reciprocal program. So the U.S. government chose not to invite and welcome others to share their experience with us, but rather to only send young, Americans overseas. So it evolved in the way that it has. So it has remained small, and I think I want to say back in March of 2020, when the global evacuation of Peace Corps volunteers took place in response to COVID, something like 7,500 volunteers came back. And so at any given time, I think somewhere in that 7,000 to 7,500 volunteers are serving or were serving prior to the pandemic. It's only now slowly, Peace Corps is only now slowly putting volunteers back in countries overseas, and it'll take a while to rebuild those numbers, and that really has to do with health and security concerns.
Sure. I worked with a Peace Corps member who was stationed in Ukraine and was evacuated in 2020. And it was a very abrupt evacuation. Once they finally made the call that that COVID was not going to be going away anytime soon, they pulled them out. It was very abrupt. And
I'll say this: our graduate fellowship program grew rather quickly in response to that, because I literally we were pretty much closing our recruitment window, and I immediately received emails and texts and folks reaching out saying, "Oh my gosh, I've just been evacuated. Is it too late? Can I still apply?" And I literally made the decision to stretch and consider more applicants, which then turned into inviting more students into the program in response to that, because there were so many folks back in the States scrambling to figure out what next, and their service, they didn't want to end their service, right? And so this allows, our program allows folks to, yes, pursue a master's degree, but also, and maybe more importantly to this conversation, also allows them to continue to serve and to apply their skills and their academic preparation and their experiences to serve stateside, and specifically in Illinois and in rural communities in Illinois. And so it's not like our needs here had gone down. And so when there were more folks returning and interested in doing this work and this service, I stretched and we grew and we accommodated that.
So connect the dots there. How does somebody fresh out of college who then goes to the Dominican Republic for 2 years wind up in Macomb, Illinois, at the Harvard of the Midwest? And I say this lovingly because I am a graduate of Western as well. How does somebody wind up in Macomb, Illinois for the better part of 30 years?
So that's the thing. Remember, I was coming from Southern California, from La Jolla. In fact, it's
when you go from Southern California, the Caribbean, of course, the next step is the cornfields of Macomb.
Right, because I had to check that off. That was never what I understood was my life plan. But remember when I said earlier that for me, the big decisions aren't actually decisions when they arise and my body gets calm and open and it all feels right, I trust that. It's so that happened. And it also is related to connecting dots. It's related to the fact that I met my husband, John Curtis, there. And so John was raised in Wisconsin, but his grandparents are from Macomb. And so he's got one set of grandparents that are farmers, multiple generations of farmers in McDonough County. And the other set of grandparents are actually from Tennessee, but made their career at Western Illinois University as a faculty member, and then his grandmother was an educator. So his parents grew up here. He had a connection, he had family, he had land. John was an agricultural volunteer in Peace Corps, so he really was on the ground growing stuff, learning so much, and was and is committed to a healthy stewardship of the land and making living on the land not as toxic and detrimental as we have made it. So he was interested in coming back and being on his grandparents' land, to make it short. And so we were interested in being together. And so that's how we ended up here. We first came back, went to Wisconsin. We're there for about a year. First time I lived in snow, especially coming from the Caribbean, wake up call. That was awesome. And then we made our way here. And I came through this program. So this program is Western Illinois University has a graduate fellowship program for returned Peace Corps volunteers. It's a Coverdell fellowship program. It's one of the benefits of service in Peace Corps is that Peace Corps has gone out of its way to make partnerships with universities across the country who will provide some financial benefit and some support and some continued service opportunity for returned Peace Corps volunteers. And so Western Illinois University had just launched its Peace Corps Fellows program at the time in the mid-90s. And I was in the second cohort of fellows. So I came back to the States and then started graduate school in fall of 95. And it was just a new thing. And I knew graduate school was in my future. I actually thought a doctorate in sociology was in my future. That's not what happened, but I remained open to those other possibilities. And so here I am doing this work. But so that's how we end up in Macomb. John has family here, and to us, community matters. We decided that we would choose to be together and choose to be where we had family and access to land and to support systems so that we could do the work we wanted to do in the world, and that we would find and or create those opportunities for work and school wherever we were. This just happens to be where John's family was. And so this is where we made that commitment. WIU's program was a great fit for me. So I went through the program as a fellow, served, I pursued my degree in geography. At the time, the fellows program offered 3 possible degrees, a master's in economics, an MBA, or a master's in geography. Coming from sociology, the geography department seemed like the best fit, people on the planet. And so I pursued my degree through that. And then I served in Illinois. My internship was in the village of Cambridge, Illinois. So bedroom community to Quad Cities, county seat in Henry County. So I did that. My service was there. We were not yet an AmeriCorps program, much to my chagrin, because that Ed Award would have been awesome. And the program became an AmeriCorps program shortly thereafter. I want to say it was like 97 or 98. And AmeriCorps, I think, was a direct program. So the idea that just in terms of connecting dots, I make it to the Midwest, given John's family and connections here. I pursue graduate school because that's an opportunity I want to pursue for myself. Have this opportunity to bring my Peace Corps experience and my commitment to continued education and service through Western's Peace Corps Fellows program. And we're committed to staying in the area. So we stay John pursues a master's degree at Western, not through this program, through the education department. And we start to build our life here. I'll say that the opportunity to continue to serve is integral to, one, my interest in the program, but specifically to the success of Western's program. When we, and it wasn't me, it was a predecessor in my program, Tom Anderson, when he applied for the funding to be an AmeriCorps state and national program, that was essential for the benefit and strength of our graduate fellowship program, because we were already offering return Peace Corps volunteers this opportunity to do school and to pursue a degree and to apply their skills. Again, I did the same thing that our members do now. I did 1 year graduate coursework in Macomb, 20 hours a week as a graduate assistant on local projects. The second year, I'm living and serving in a small rural village in Illinois. That's the model of our program. I'm helping them lead and implement their community development high priority action items, and so we do all of that. Once the program added the layer of that second year being AmeriCorps service, there was just a peak in interest because there's a peak in benefits. I mean, it was that Ed Award piece makes it just a little bit more interesting to those of us who carry student debt. And again, I missed out. I didn't, I came through the program before it was AmeriCorps funded, but we became WIU became an AmeriCorps State and National program. 2003 was the first grant. I joined in 2004 as part of the transition in leadership. And so I really came on at the very beginning of that AmeriCorps grant. In fact, I believe that AmeriCorps grant is actually how they funded my position in terms of the administrative piece, to be able to shadow, because I overlapped with the original management team for a full year before they peeled off, right? Somebody moved to a different project, somebody retired, somebody went on to graduate school. And so I was able to overlap for a full year. The AmeriCorps funding made that possible. And then I've been on the ground managing our program, yes, as a Coverdell program for Return Peace Corps volunteers, and this transparent added layer of AmeriCorps support and the benefit of its network. And I've seen that network grow and strengthen, really both deepen and widen in terms of a presence. And literally in my 18 years, it has, initially it was part of what we were doing, and there was just less awareness. And in those 18 years, it's grown significantly. And your time in Illinois was a big part of helping make that happen. Telling stories like you're doing now. I'm not surprised you're continuing to do this work in this way, because sharing the stories makes more people aware. And the more people that are aware, the more the conversation is happening. And then the more we attract and the more we retain. Recruitment is no good if there isn't a solid something to retain folks.
There's always the 3 R's of volunteerism: recruitment, retention, and recognition. Absolutely.
They're essential. And that's true. That's true in academic recruitment. That's true, I think, in work life. That's true in the volunteer sector. I have seen that to be essential. And when you miss one of those R's, when you miss one of those legs in the 3-legged stool, you're weaker, right? Your future and your sustainability is more vulnerable.
So we're talking a lot about AmeriCorps, and for those who may not know AmeriCorps, we refer to AmeriCorps lovingly as the domestic Peace Corps. So as you mentioned, somebody for Peace Corps will be deployed for 2 years in another country. With AmeriCorps, you have usually about a year where you serve in country in the United States. And as you mentioned, get an education award while you're serving, as well as, for most AmeriCorps members, receiving a minimal stipend while you're serving as well too. Nothing really to write home about, but hopefully it's enough to keep the lights on. Yeah. And then the education award currently for a full-time member is $6,495 that you can use to pay off student loan debt or pay for school you haven't taken yet. Or if you're over 55, you can transfer it to a child, grandchild, or foster child. So we talked about how you are in a rare group of folks who have served in Peace Corps, but you're even more rare in the fact that you have served in Peace Corps and managed AmeriCorps members.
Yes.
So in your experience, what are some of the differences, and what are some of the uh, things that are shared between the two programs?
Sure. Great question. Let me think about that for a moment, gather my thoughts. I think I think some obvious, well, the most obvious difference is the where the service takes place and the how long it lasts, right? So again, as you mentioned, Peace Corps is international service, and AmeriCorps is national, on U.S. soil. So that being the big difference. Also, the time commitment. I will say that 27-month service commitment with Peace Corps, again, 3 months of pre-service training in your host country before you then take your oath of service and then serve your 24 months. That 27-month commitment is, I think, essential for Peace Corps. In some ways, 2 years is not even enough, because that first year, you're just doing all the learning. I mean, you're trying to make connections, all of those things. So that the second year, you may actually be in a place where you can effectively facilitate projects and help move some things forward, because ultimately we are supposed to be trying to do some of that providing that technical assistance to host country nationals, which is the term US gives those folks. So that 2 years is essential for that. On the AmeriCorps side, there are more options. There's everything from a summer, right? There's the minimum time service, there's quarter time service, and AmeriCorps has added more options, sort of chopped up the service year into smaller pieces, if you will. And so you can do that, again, minimum time, quarter time, half time. I think there's like a reduced half time, and then there's 3/4 time and full time. So more options in terms of the amount of time you're serving. And again, it's national, it's stateside. So it allows folks to serve in their own communities, literally in their own communities, or in another community, but still in the US. And so those are two differences. And I see pros and cons to both. Again, I think that the 2 years is essential in Peace Corps. I think that makes sense given the language and cultural piece. I think it's excellent that AmeriCorps offers itty bitty service time slots and then a longer time slots, and it does allow folks to serve multiple years. And so I do have, our AmeriCorps members do have the opportunity to, that first year in our graduate program, can be serving as half-time members for that 20-hour-a-week graduate assistantship that they're already doing. Our program already offered that, and so it allows them to blend that with part-time AmeriCorps service. And then that second year in our program, it's full-time community-based internship. That's their full-time AmeriCorps assignment. So I like that fact that AmeriCorps allows folks to serve again, because again, there's some depth there. And what I see is, the more you serve, the more you learn about it, so the better you are as you continue, right? And the more you have to offer and to give. So those two being the differences, the length of time and the location where the service takes place. Beyond that, I think that the similarities are there. I want to say, like most things, we're more similar than we are different as people, I think. And my international living and serving abroad has confirmed that for me. So I think that service is our common experience and our shared language. And so people are motivated to serve for many reasons. And I will say this, that I had I think a narrow understanding of why people serve when I first started service. And I was taken aback when I remember meeting and talking to other Peace Corps volunteers in terms of why they were there. And it hadn't occurred to me that somebody's motivation would be so different from my own. And that was good. That was good for me to think, oh, right, we can be doing this good work side by side, but we're here for different reasons. And so, so I think that is good. At the end of the day, we are all still there, and we all wanted to serve and to make a difference and to show up. And so that is a shared piece. The willingness to put yourself in a situation where your efforts might be for the good of somebody else, and ideally a greater good, right? And so I think that sentiment is shared, and is what really bonds us together. I do think that there is by AmeriCorps offering lots of itty bitty service opportunities, and it being national service, provides an opportunity that Peace Corps, I think maybe misses out on some folks. This is about the who gets to serve, right? You have to start out in a privileged position almost to show up for that kind of service, right? So when the facts are that Peace Corps is committed to changing this, and I've seen it change over time. AmeriCorps is committed to changing this, and I'm seeing change in my time there as well. But when it's certain socioeconomic groups and certain, let's just say, more white kids from liberal colleges apply to Peace Corps than not, right? That's who gets to take 2 years to do that, right? That's who gets to do that. And so those two agencies, like I said, are doing this and need to do more of what are some of those barriers so that we can have a more diverse Corps, and what can we do to prepare and identify and support folks so that they can take that time to serve without it being a hit, such a hit financially to them, but more importantly to their families, because depending on the individual and the group that they're, coming from, they're not just providing for themselves, potentially they're providing for others. And so I do see, and in that sense, AmeriCorps' smaller, shorter terms of service and closer to home creates an opportunity that Peace Corps doesn't have in terms of bringing a more diverse group of people to the service table, if you will. But even there, we see that it's you still have to be in a certain position to be able to do that. And I've met with lots of undergraduate students at Western who are interested in serving in Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, but the idea that they wouldn't be contributing financially to their family's well-being or addressing their student debt or other commitments is too great a burden, and they don't pursue the application because of that. And that's often when we really do have that conversation about, if you really want to serve and you want this leadership opportunity and the service opportunity, let's look at what AmeriCorps position might be a good fit for you, whether it's through my program or somewhere else, right? We want more people to get to serve, because we know the benefits are lifelong for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's definitely an issue with Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. I've seen it throughout my time. You've just said you've seen it throughout your time. It is not we like to say anyone can serve, and that's, the key goal, but not anyone can serve. And it's not just Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, it's volunteerism in general.
Right.
More often than not, the communities that people serve in do not have the representation in that volunteer corps, because they're having to go through whatever experience they're going through, and that is making it almost impossible to have the ability and the time and the experience and the everything to get into that service realm. So I think this is an issue that we face in the service field across the board. And it's an issue we have to tackle more, and we have to be less afraid to talk about it.
Right.
We have to be very, very honest with ourselves that if we want to go into, say, extremely rural community or a very urban community, we need folks serving that represent that community, and that is how we're going to make the biggest impact. Right. But it is a tough nut to crack. Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, I have seen gains, and I see intentional planning, and that matters, because intentionality matters. It just all takes so much darn time. But it's about people, right? Development work is that, right? And so I always say the best thing about development work is it's people. The hardest thing about development work is the people.
I'm also glad you brought up the less than full-time positions, because a good friend of mine who I think you've met before, Tom Brannon, was one of the people who really pushed for that 1,200 hour slot and got that through Congress. And I think
Yeah.
he doesn't get the praise for that enough because it's a huge win for AmeriCorps.
Yes.
And he doesn't know this yet because I haven't asked him. But when he listens to this, he will be on this show, so he doesn't get a choice.
That's excellent.
So.
Well, and a thank you there, Tom, because our program literally has been able to recruit because of the academic year, a graduate student, for some people in that 8 or 9 month year, they were they were pushing, you can't finish a full time 1,700 hour commitment in that time, and yet the summer may be obligated for other reasons. And so having that 1,200 hour option has allowed us to attract and retain solid AmeriCorps members for whom that time commitment makes sense and allows them to do more than the halftime, but not quite that full. Anyhow, all of those options, yes. I think are good.
So I really do appreciate the time, and I bet you have a lot more that you can share. So this probably won't be the last time, but is there one parting piece of wisdom? What would you want to share with somebody who maybe hasn't made the commitment yet to volunteer, whether it be, just going to a local food pantry and serving, or deciding to take 2 years out of their life and go into another country? What would you say to that person about why they should get involved?
I think for me, service has been the most life-affirming choice I've ever made. It is, again, my Peace Corps service was transformative. I'll say this, it's not that it's not so much that it made me who I am, it has shown me who I want to become. And it challenges me to continue to show up in that way. And it's not about what I do, it's about who I am becoming still. And so it is life affirming. It puts you in direct contact with others in a meaningful way. We have to be willing to be vulnerable so that we can connect with others. We need to be on a level playing field, and so it's life affirming. It's the best thing you could do for yourself while doing hopefully some good for others. We all need it. We need each other. We need to show up in this way.
Thank you so much for that. And I completely agree. And thank you so much for your time as well, too. And more importantly, thank you for your service that you have done and that you continue to do. But yeah.
Likewise. This is so much fun. And thank you for doing this. This is great. We all sharing stories as, hearing each other's stories. Thank you. I'm so excited that you're doing this. I'm so excited that you're continuing to serve in leadership roles in the ways that you are. So I look forward to our continuing contact and professional relationship in this work together. Thank you, Scott.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to This Volunteer Life. Please be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and leave a review. You can visit thisvolunteerlife.com to find all our social media accounts, find all the volunteer stories, submit your volunteer story, and find a volunteer opportunity in your neck of the woods. The opening closing theme was Fighter by OG's Not Again, available on Bixabay. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.